Good morning, everyone. We are exploring the rich and complicated, and I like to emphasize that word, complicated history of Christianity and studying the Bible in context. We identify bad theology and misconceptions about God, the Bible, about hell, and following Jesus' teaching. If you find this video helpful, please let us know in the comment section below. We'd love to hear your thoughts and your experiences. Well, we have just started our new series on the book of Genesis. So if you were here last week, I did the introduction, kind of set the framework for the book of Genesis, kind of give a little background of what we're going to attempt to do. We're going to try to put this book into context for you. And I can kind of warn you right now, if you were raised as a fundamentalist, or you were raised as an evangelical, or as a mix of the two, a fundagelical, you might struggle a little bit with some of the ideas and concepts I'm about to present to you. They might be a little jarring. So buckle your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy ride, boys. Right, here we go. All right, so some of the questions we have for you today as we look at Genesis chapter 1 through Genesis chapter 2, verse 3. That's the 7 days of creation. Some of the questions we have is 7 days of creation accurate? What's our place in the cosmos? And when I say our, I mean human beings. And is humanity's creation's pinnacle? All good questions. By the way, if you're going along and you're watching this video and you suddenly feel just that urge to type a comment in all caps telling me that I'm not teaching the Bible correctly because it's always been taught this way for the last 2,000 years, okay, right? Just stop, because I can guarantee you it has not been taught the same way for 2,000 years. The early church fathers taught Genesis very different than the fundamentalist of today. So we'll take a look at this. What is the purpose of the study? Why am I doing Genesis? I have put off Genesis for a long time. There are two books that I have put off for a long time. One of them is Romans. I put that off for a long time. I finally did the book of Romans. I'm like, okay, I'm finally ready to tackle this. Because Romans is so deep in theology, and it structures a lot of what we believe, and putting that book back into context, I think helped liberate a lot of people, but I think at the same time it shook a lot of people up. The other book is Genesis, because there's so much in Genesis, especially the first 11 chapters, that were like, if you were raised fundamentalist, this is going to be tough for you. I can just guarantee you that. So I've been kind of putting this off for a while. But I just feel like I'm in a good place now. I feel the church is in a good place. The people who watch this on YouTube, I think you're all in a good place. So we can kind of move on with this. What's the purpose of this study? I'm not trying to prove the Bible wrong. That's not my purpose. That's not my purpose. There can be some people who are upset. They're like, oh, but the Bible is the inspired, inerrant, infallible Word of God, and you're trying to prove it wrong. Okay? Usually the people who are screaming that stuff are looking to use the Bible as a weapon for it to be the only authority. And those who can manipulate the Bible to make it say what they want to say then have authority and power over you. So yes, I'm taking away your authority and power. You know what I'm doing? I'm taking that authority and power and giving it back to the community where it belongs. What I hope happens here is that you take the ideas and concepts that I present to you today and that you discuss them. You go back to your community, you discuss them, and you see what wisdom comes from them. You know, there's something interesting about wisdom. Wisdom is very easy to apply to new situations. You know, as the world changes, and we are living in a changing world, we can apply wisdom. But old laws, not so much. When you put everything set in stone, it's harder to apply to a new situation. But wisdom applies to every situation. You can always apply wisdom. So that's what I'm trying to lead you to, is wisdom, not laws. I'm attempting to teach the Bible in a truthful way. I can't tell you how many ex-evangelicals I have run into, and I've talked to online, and that I've interacted with, and they're just like, I found out this wasn't true. They taught me this in the Bible, and I found out it's not true. What else did they lie to me about? And they walk away from the church, because the church is not teaching the Bible in a truthful way. I think we just need to be honest about it up front. I mean, are we not supposed to be truthful individuals? Are we not supposed to be representing the truth? If so, we need to be truthful about what's really in the Bible. And I want to point out again, Genesis, like I said to you last week, Genesis is not scientific or historical truth. It was not written that way. It was not intended to be that way. When the people who collected and edited and wrote down the book of Genesis, when they wrote these stories down, they didn't go, I'm writing a scientific textbook. None of them did that. None of them said, oh, we're writing the history. None of them did that. They all said, here's what I want to talk about God. Here's what I want to say about God. The book of Genesis is to point you to certain theological truths about God. That's what its purpose is. And that's what my purpose is too. Help excavate out what are they trying to say about God. Okay? I think oftentimes if you're trying to use this as a scientific textbook, you end up with bad pseudoscience. I'm looking at you, young earth creationist. Okay? That's just bad creation. That's just bad pseudoscience. So, all right, moving on. The inspired writers of Genesis interacted with Egyptian, Sumerian, and Babylonian myths. Some of you are like, what? Yes. You know what? Every part of Genesis chapter 1 through chapter 2, verse 3, and again, I want to remind you, the chapters and verses were added much, much later. So that's why we have the 7 days of creation broke up over 2 chapters. When they put them all in one chapter, it would have made more sense. But hey, that's just me. All right. So they interacted with myths. I can go through that entire section and point out this is from this myth, this is from this myth, this is from this myth, this is from this myth. And this is what I think is so inspired about it. This is why I say the inspired writings of Genesis. Because they used language, they used symbols that the people knew, and they could easily communicate to them these truths. They're like, you already know these stories, you already know these symbols, you already know these myths. Let me communicate a new truth to you using these. The people who received this were already primed to receive these truths in a language that they understood, in symbols they understood, in myths that they already understood. And by changing them a little bit, they brought new truths to them. I'll show you what I mean. By the way, interacted with, when I say they interacted with these Babylonian myths, these Egyptian myths, Sumerian myths, I don't mean copied or plagiarized. Sometimes you'll see some really, outlandish kind of titles if you go through YouTube, Genesis chapter 1 plagiarized Babylonian myths. And it's like, they didn't really plagiarize it. Okay, first off, there's no copyrights. But second, this was just normal. Over generation after generation, people shared these oral stories and they would change them, they would alter them. Because they're trying to make different perspectives, they're trying to bring in different truths. So this was just the normal process that these stories went through. So by the time that we get them to writing down in Genesis, it's not plagiarism. Okay, it doesn't mean that they stole them. I saw that in one of the YouTube video titles. Genesis chapter 1 stole Egyptian myths. I'm like, they didn't steal them. They're still there. They just interacted with them. Okay, so it doesn't mean copied, it doesn't mean plagiarized. What it does mean is that they have an intertextual awareness. They are aware of these texts, and they are using them, and they either affirm parts of them, or they deny parts of them, and they retell these myths to bring out new truths. I'll let that settle for a second. Everybody take a deep breath. If you were born fundamentalist, that one just hurt. You're like, okay, you're getting ready to hit that cap space on your computer. You're like, okay, right? Just, we're all going to be okay. All right, let's go through this. Let me show some of the Egyptian myths that they interacted with. Are you ready for this one? The first one is the birth of Re. We also call this the birth of Ra. Okay, so scholars, is his name Re or is his name Ra? But this is basically the Egyptian sun god. He's a falcon-headed god. Okay, in the beginning of the world, according to the birth of Re, okay, all that existed were primordial waters. Is that beginning to sound familiar? All that existed were primordial waters until the birth of Re. And the first thing that happened with the birth of Re, what did Re bring with him? Light. And he will create the sun. Re is the birth of light. The very beginning of all things. All things begin with light. And then the creation of the land and the sky, that's accomplished the birth of other gods. I don't have any kids in here today, do I? Okay, no kids. I can tell you this. Re masturbates and ejaculates, and that creates the other gods. That's kind of a nice thought, isn't it? You know, right? And as they're created, they do other things, and right? So all the sky and the earth and everything, it's all created through various actions of these other gods. Oh, there's your little falcon-headed ray right there. You see above him, his little head, you see the sun. But that's the very first thing that happens. Light. Another Egyptian myth, we call this the Memphis theology of Ptah. Okay, and I'm not talking Memphis, Tennessee. I'm talking about the big city of Memphis in Egypt that Memphis, Tennessee is named after. Okay, so Memphis, their primary god, the god that the city of Memphis worshipped, was a god called Ptah. And he was in competition with the god Re for who should be the most prominent god. Because this is what the cities did. Right? One city had shrines and temples to Re, another like Memphis, they would have a shrine and temple to Ptah. And it's like, our God's better than your God. Look at our temple, it's nicer. You know, our God did this, well, our God did that. Well, our God did this. Yeah, and there was a little competition. And so the theology that surrounded Ptah wanted to prove that he was the superior God and that you should follow him. Because according to the creation myth, Ptah creates the world by fiat. Fiat means command. He doesn't have to ejaculate to create things. He just speaks, and it happens. No other, and in fact, he does it all. There's no other intermediate actions by other gods. He just speaks, this happens. He just speaks, that happens. He just speaks, this happens. He's like, our God is so great, he just says it. And it happens. He doesn't have to do all this other stuff like your God. So obviously our God's better. Does that sound familiar? He just speaks and it happens? The superiority of a God who creates by his will alone. That's the whole point of the Memphis theology. Oh, there's a picture of Ptah, which is always really interesting because Ptah is always depicted as having green skin. So let your alien conspiracy theories start. Okay? If you were back here in the 70s, this was Chariots of the Gods. Now we got, ancient astronauts and, all that kind of stuff nowadays. So let your little conspiracy theories begin. Maybe he's a green-skinned Venusian or something. Oh, I'm sorry. Venusians are blue-skinned. Martian? I don't know. Moving on. Khnum forms humans. This Egyptian myth of Khnum, who is responsible for creating human beings. What does Khnum make them out of? Khnum forms likenesses on his potter's wheel. The word used for likenesses is the same word that we use for idols. They're little figurines that look like the gods. He forms likenesses on his potter's wheel. He makes them out of clay. He creates the first human beings. And then later on, as the stories about Canaan are forming and expanded, supposedly every time a woman has a child, he makes a little baby in clay and sticks it inside the mother. Yeah. So he's responsible for human beings. He makes them out of clay. Does that sound familiar? There's Khnum. There's his little potter's wheel. There he is making his little likenesses. Okay. Let's talk about Sumerian myths. Okay. There's one called the Eridu Genesis, also known as the Sumerian creation myth. In the Sumerian flood story, okay, it's basically the flood story, but it has a prologue kind of to it that talks about the creation of the universe. This epic tells the story of how the gods created the world, built cities, created human beings from clay. The gods also established kingships and eventually decide to destroy humanity with a flood. So this idea of creating human beings from clay, where did human beings come from? They made them out, the Sumerian gods made them out of clay. That's where human beings came from. In the prologue to the Epic of Gilgamesh, in Kidu and the Netherworld, okay, we have a brief description of creation. This again is a prologue. It begins with Namu, the primeval sea. That sound familiar? The primeval sea. Who gives birth to Utu without a father, then creates On, the sky, and Ki, the earth. Creating the sky and the earth, right? Okay. On and Ki mate, these two mate, and they give birth to Inli, the god of wind, rain, and storm. Now, all of On and Ki's kids are too noisy. They cause a lot of ruckus. It makes the other gods get mad, so they decide they're going to destroy them. So, luckily for them, right, a hero rises up, fights against them, and he separates On and Ki. He separates sky and earth. Okay, taking the earth for himself, right, and On taking the sky. This idea of separating sky and earth, that begin to sound familiar? Have you heard that before somewhere? Enki and Ninmah. In this story, the lesser gods complain to Nama, the primeval mother, about the hard work of creating the earth. So all these lower gods are trying to create the earth and take care of everything. It's a lot of hard work. We're tired. Why do we have to do it? Right? Mom, why do we have to do all this work? Can't you do something about this? So Nama then asks her son Enki, the god of wisdom, to create a substitute to free the gods. So Nama needs clay, puts it in her womb, and gives birth to the first humans. Now, let's move to the Babylonian myths. So, we've got certain Egyptian myths, we have Sumerian myths, let's move on to Babylonian myths. The Enuma Elish, okay, the separation of sweet water from salt water. Okay, and these were two different gods, Apsu and Tiamat. So for my Dungeon and Dragon players, that's where the name Tiamat comes from. Yes, Gary Gygax borrowed a lot of different names from a lot of different sources. All right, so Apsu and Tiamat. Okay, these two new gods give birth to many others. And there's a battle between the gods that kill Tiamat. So Apsu is the sweet water, Tiamat is the salt water. Apsu is order, Tiamat is chaos. And so they destroy chaos, and they split her body in two to create the heavens and the earth. The separation between the heavens and the earth. Marduk creates humans afterwards, and the purpose of the human beings is simply to serve the gods. Like in the previous Sumerian myth, they create the human beings to do all the work. In this myth, they create the human beings to serve the gods. Your servants, your slaves, that's what you are. All right. That's all the myths that I want to look at where they borrowed from. Throughout Genesis chapter 1, all through Genesis chapter 2, verse 3, there are echoes and allusions to these ancient stories. They touch on them. They interact with these texts. They're going to change them a little bit, affirming some things, denying other things, to make certain theological points. Using familiar stories and images, the writers craft new theological truths about Elohim. And this is who they are referring to God as, Elohim. As I pointed out last week, they actually use 4 different names for God. The most prominent is Elohim, and the second is Yahweh. There's some other ones, but those may just be ways to avoid saying God's sacred name. But Elohim and Yahweh. So we know there are multiple sources of stories coming, probably from one group that worshiped God and knew him as Elohim, and from another group that knew him as Yahweh. And eventually these groups would merge together, and they merged their stories together. All right, so they're going to talk about new theological truths about Elohim. It's these truths that I want to take a look at. So let's look at the actual verses here. Oh my gosh, here we go. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This kind of borrows a little bit from the previous myths, right? We have the sky, we have the earth being created, 2 different gods. But notice, these aren't gods. They're just the things that they are. They're not other gods. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. So again, we have these primordial waters. This is something that everybody throughout this Near Eastern area, throughout all of Mesopotamia would have understood. Ah, yes, the primordial waters. When there was no order. If you actually read the New Revised Standard Version, it doesn't say formless and empty, it says chaos. Because at this time, when this story was written, the way that people understood the world was not about a battle between good and evil. It was about a battle between chaos and order. And that it's always order that gets imposed upon all the chaos. And in some stories, chaos is destroyed. In other stories, chaos is merely contained. In the biblical accounts, chaos is merely contained, not destroyed, because chaos is necessary to the earth. That's part of Jewish theology. Anyway, now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Now there's an interesting thing about the word spirit. The Hebrew word for spirit is the same word for breath, is the same word for wind. They're all the same. The same word is used for all three different ideas. Spirit, breath, wind. And remember, in the myths, it's the wind god that comes to fight. So, again, in the New Revised Standard Version, it actually says wind. There was a wind from God. But many people choose to say spirit. The Spirit of God was hovering over the waters, these primordial waters. And God said, what's the first thing? Let there be light. And everybody would have said, we get it. That's the first thing that was necessary, light. Light is the creative force. Light is what brings life. It's got to be light first. They would have understood it from the old Egyptian myths. It would have been spreading all throughout that area. Yes, of course, let there be light. That's the way it's supposed to be. That's the order of things. This story makes sense to us. But I want you to stop for a second and have a new thought about something. You know, oftentimes, by the time that we get to the New Testament, we talk about the Gospel of John, you know. We talk about Jesus as the light of the world. Jesus as the light of the world. You know, a lot of scholars say, well, you know, John was kind of borrowing upon Gnostic traditions, the fight between, you know, the forces of light and the fight between the forces of darkness. Light and darkness fighting against each other. But what if that's not the way that it is? What if Jesus is the light of the world in the sense that he's the beginning of it all? He is the creative force. He is what brings life to everything. It's not about being in battle against something. It's about being the start. It's about being all life to all things. That gives you a whole different view of Jesus, doesn't it? We demilitarize Christianity when it's no longer a battle between light and darkness, and we merely see that our founder is life-giving to all things, that he is the creative force behind all things. Does that change the way you think about how you should practice your faith? We're no longer militant. We're now life-giving. We become a group of healers and creative life-givers rather than soldiers in an army against darkness. Just a thought. Just throw it out there for you. Let there be light, and there was light. Notice that God, Elohim, does it by fiat. No intermediaries. This makes him the superior God. Oh, you think it was Ptah, that green-skinned guy? No, it was Elohim. And he didn't create another God who became light. He simply created light. Because there's no other gods but him. He is the superior God. He speaks by fiat. It's done by his will only. That's who Elohim is. Our God's better than your God. Because your God doesn't even exist. There's only one, Elohim, and he does it all by will. And he saw that the light was good. I like this word good in there. I'm going to talk about it in just a second. Okay? And he separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day. No sun yet. But we have to start with light. Because that's what made sense to everybody. We have to start with light. We have to start with this creative force. We have to start with this life-giving force. Where else would you start? You can't create with that without light first. That's why it comes before the sun. Let's talk about the word good. There it is in Hebrew. Okay? It means, the word actually means good, merry, pleasant, desirable, in order, as opposed to in chaos. Efficient, friendly, kind, morally good. Normally when we think about good, we think, good versus evil. Or we say, oh, this is good, as in, it's better than that one. But it means so much more. We're talking about God's creation is pleasant. It's not a harsh environment that he created for us. That God's creation is desirable. God's creation is in order. It's efficient. It's reached its perfection. It's everything that it should be. The world is as it should be. When Elohim speaks and exerts his will, he creates things as it should be. And God said, let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water. Have we done this before? Yeah, I want to separate sweet water from salt water. So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. That's Tiamat's body being ripped in half. They would go, well, that makes sense. Oh, it wasn't another god that died in a battle and it was created this? No. Elohim simply spoke, and this is what we saw. Oh, okay. The vault, and it was so. God called the vault sky, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. There's no creating other gods, one who's earth, one who's sky. There's no separating in a battle some dead god's body to create the sky and the water, because there are no other gods. It's simply Elohim who speaks, and it is. And God said, let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear. Again, we're not creating other gods. This one's sky, this one's earth. And so it was. God called the dry ground land, and he gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the third day. Are you beginning to get this picture? Hey, we understand that, there was a certain kind of order to create. There's light, and then there's, the sky you got to put up there, and you got to get the earth, and you got to separate fresh water from salt water, and you got to do all these kind of things. And so this story is maintaining this order. The people are able to hear it. They're able to see it. They're able to understand it. Yes, this is the way that things were. This is the way that things should be. But we've eliminated all other gods except for Elohim. And he proves his superiority in that he doesn't need intermediaries. He simply speaks, and it happens. And God said, let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark the sacred times and days and years. And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on earth. And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the fourth day. God didn't create another god. He created the sun. You think Ra, the sun, that's a god moving across the sky in his little chariot? No. Actually, it's not a chariot, it's a barge. You think that's Ra moving across the sky in his little barge? No, there's no other gods. God created a light for that. And you think the moon is a god? That's not another god. That's just something Elohim created. There are no other gods. There's only one. It's Elohim. And he created all this stuff. No intermediary gods, none of this nonsense. And God said, let the waters teem with living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky. So God created the great creatures of the sea, and every living thing with which the waters teem, and that move about in the accordance to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. Make sure you pay attention to that, according to their kind, because this is order. God brings order to the chaos. The primordial waters are just chaotic. It's without form. It's got nothing to it, right? It's just all chaos. And yet, God puts everything in order, and now everything reproduces according to its kind. It follows a certain order to it. This is going to become important later, by the way. See, when you get to the book of Leviticus, you know how you tell the difference between clean and unclean things? They don't follow according to kind. They're out of order. They're chaotic. Let me give you an example. Pigs. What's wrong with pigs? Well, the Jewish people went, oh, we have a certain kind of animal over here. Look, we have goats, okay? We got cows. We got various other critters over here that have cloven hooves. And they all chew the cud. Isn't that cool? That's all one kind, and they reproduce according to their kind. That's order. Hey, boss, what about this one? It's got cloven hooves. Yeah, but it doesn't chew the cud. It doesn't chew the cud. Wait, it's got cloven hooves and it doesn't chew the cud. That one's a little chaotic. That one doesn't follow according to kind. That one's unclean. Unclean! Nobody touch this one. Penguins. Penguins are unclean. Can't eat a penguin. Did you know that? You know what's wrong with a penguin? It's a freaking bird that swims. It's not following according to kind. It doesn't follow according to kind. Unclean. Unclean. You go through all the animals that are marked as unclean, they don't follow according. There's something chaotic about them. I think if in ancient times the ancient Israelites had encountered a duck-billed platypus, their head would have exploded. They'd be like, that one's really unclean. I don't know what that is. Banish it. Don't even look at it. If you look at it, you're unclean. What is that thing? It's got ducks and beavers and chickens and out of here. Lays eggs? What's that all about? Unclean. Okay. Order, chaos. And the animals that don't follow exactly according to their kind become unclean. They're deemed unclean. That's the difference between clean and unclean, whether or not they follow according to kind. That makes sense? Yeah. And God saw that it was all good. What did God do? He blessed them and said, be fruitful and increase in number and fill the waters in the sea. Let the birds increase on the earth. And there was evening and there was morning the fifth day. Of course, there's nothing for them to eat yet. And God said, let the land produce living creatures according to their kind, the livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, and the wild animals according to its kind. And it was so. And God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. The livestock, the stuff you can eat. Not that one. That one's a little chaotic. Oink, 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 oink yourself, you little chaos monster. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image. And a lot of them translate it out as likeness. This goes back to that potter's wheel, making man out of clay. In Genesis chapter 2, when we get to the story of the Garden of Eden, what does he make Adam out of? Some of them will say dust, some of them will say dirt, some of them will say clay. But make them like us. Just like we made these likenesses before. So why are they here? To rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and over all the wild animals, over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Why did he create them? To be servants? Like Marduk? No. Did he create them to be slaves? No. See, the other myths has human beings as servants and slaves to do all the work, to serve the gods. But God exalts them to rulership over creation. That's a very different relationship. What? This Elohim, he's not like these other gods we've been learning about. He's different. He just speaks and things happen, and there's no other gods. There's only one. And he made us, and we get to rule. Wow. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. Then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds in the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food, and so it was. God not only creates them and sets them in a place to rule, but he blesses them. I bless you. Not only that, I'm giving you all this stuff. I'm going to provide for you. That is a very different position than as, we don't want to work, so we're making human beings. You do all the work. That's a very different position than your only existence is to serve us. You know, I think that's where Christianity gets it wrong sometimes. And we revert back to the old myths that we're only here on earth to serve God. I like the Westminster Catechism because, what's the chief end of man? To enjoy God. We're to enjoy all the blessings that he gives us. God brought us and created us to bless us. That's why I hate Calvinism. Why did God create you? Well, some of you he created so you can go to heaven, and the rest of you he created so he could torture in hell for eternity. What? God created us because he wanted to bless us and honor us and provide for us and take care of us so that we could enjoy him. There's a really different view there from what I hear in Christianity sometimes. God saw all that he made and it was good. It was just as it should be. Perfectly efficient, enjoyable, pleasurable, desirable. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. 6 days of creation. So why didn't we just stop there? Because it's not 7. I'll talk about 7 in a second. Thus, the heavens and the earth were completed in their vast array. Let me talk about heavens and earth for a second. That is a phrase, and it's kind of a unique phrase. It's what we call a merism, M-E-R-I-S-M, merism. You guys know what a merism is? It's one of the most unnecessary things ever in language. It's where instead of actually naming the thing, you name parts of it. And by naming the parts of it, usually the extreme opposites of it, you mean everything. Okay, so let's say I'm talking to my audience. Rather than coming out and saying, hello everyone, I might say, hello ladies and gentlemen. By naming the parts, I've named all of it. Does that make sense? So by naming heaven and earth, I've now named everything. This is a way of saying everything, that God created everything that is. If I say heaven and earth, it's a merism. That means God created all the cosmos. Everything. Well, why didn't they just say everything? Because they love using this unnecessary phrase because it's more poetic. It just sounds better when you read it out loud. Thus the heavens and earth were completed in their vast array. So everything's done being made. By the 7th day, God had finished the work he had been doing, so on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. On the 7th day. Why the 7th day? I'll tell you in a second. Then God blessed the 7th day. He blesses the 7th day. He made it holy because on it he rested from all the work of creation that he had done. Later on, if you get into some of the other books of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, they will sometimes reference this creation myth that God rested on the 7th day as the reason they have Sabbath. That you rest 1 day out of 7, just like God did. In other parts of it, they will tell you, the reason we have Sabbath is because when you were slaves in Egypt, you worked 7 days a week. And so this is to remind you you are no longer slaves. Which one's correct? Both. They're just the same point from two different viewpoints. Okay, so 7. 7 is a mystical number. Did you guys know that? A lot of cultures see 7 as a mystical number. Okay, there were 7 Mesopotamian gods, so that represented the completeness of divinity. There were 7 planets, according to the Babylonians. They hadn't discovered 2 of the planets yet. They didn't have the ability to see them until we got, very powerful telescopes and things later. So for them, there were 7 planets. The Pleiades have 7 stars. And they only appeared at certain times because of where they appeared in the sky in Mesopotamia. So, and they also thought that the Pleiades were demons. By the way, I just thought I'd tell you that, right? So there were 7, technically demons. The Babylonians, who were very smart at math, they helped invent a lot of our math. They recognized it as the first infinite reciprocal. So, of course, that reciprocal is where, like, if you take a fraction and flip it upside down. So if you take, instead of 7 divided by 1, you flip it, 1 divided by 7, okay? It becomes a infinite reciprocal. It doesn't terminate. It has a repeating decimal. In fact, it repeats, if I put it down there, okay, 0.14285, 7142857, 7, right? So it's a repeating decimal. It's infinite, and it repeats. And to them, that was so fascinating. They're like, there must be something mystical about this number. It's magical in some way. And so it was used as a mystical, magical number. It was used in incantations and things like that. So 7, we need to have 7 days because this is the completeness. This is the perfection. This is the number of being infinite. This is it, 7. And so we're going to see 7 in a lot of cultures as a number of completeness. All right, so I just kind of went, here's all these myths that we, kind of touched on, borrowed from, incorporated into our particular myth. What do we do? Now that I have this knowledge, what do I do about it? I should give up on Christianity because they told me this was a literal story. They told me the earth was created in 7 days, and it's not true. I'm quitting Christianity. I'm out of here. They lied to me. No! See it for the truth that it is, right? We need to look at this and say, what theological truths are we to understand? What theological truths were they trying to tell me? What were they trying to tell me about Elohim? That God is singular. He is not one of a multitude of gods. There are no other gods. I mean, isn't that the very foundation of the ancient Israelite religion? Our God is one, singular. There are no other gods. There are no other gods. Elohim only, Yahweh only, no others. God is sovereign. He speaks and it's done. By His will, it is done. He doesn't need intermediaries. He merely speaks and it is done. God is creative. He creates all things, and He brings forth life. Our God is not a God of death and destruction. We didn't get parts of the cosmos through conflict and battle like so many of these other myths. Well, how did we get the sky, and how did we get the sea? Oh, well, we killed another god and ripped him in half. Sorry, ripped her in half. That's how we got it, through battle and death and destruction. This is the way that the world is created. No, that's not the way the world was created. Elohim spoke it, and He's a creative, life-bringing God. Does that alter the way you see the cosmos? Do we see the cosmos as an ongoing battle, an ongoing struggle? Where the only time creation happens is when we have these battles and these struggles that fight against each other, and there's death and destruction, and that brings forth new things? Or do we see it as the outflowing of one creative, life-giving God? And that we join in partnership with that God, bringing life and creation. The cosmos is not the byproduct of conflict. It is the product of God ordering it, and it is good. It is good. I hear too many of my apocalyptic Christian brothers and sisters who pronounce every day, the world is evil, the world is... No, it's good. It's good. You know what the problem is? We're not living out to what we were created to be. That's the problem. God is sovereign over chaos and darkness. He doesn't destroy them. He contains and controls them. Chaos and darkness are not evil. Oftentimes we use chaos or we use darkness as symbols for evil. But in the orderly world, there is evening, there is morning, because both are needed. There's work, there is rest. Both are needed. There's chaos and there's order. And chaos is contained, because only when chaos gets out of control does it get destructive. But chaos is a change agent. Too much order, no change, no growth. Allow chaos to spark change every once in a while, and you have growth. So these things aren't evil. The idea of good and evil, that's much later in theology. That develops much later. They are necessary parts of a good creation if they are to be contained. You know, C.S. Lewis was trying to answer the question of theodicy. Why is there evil in the world? Why do these things happen sometimes? You know, even to good people. Why is that? If God is all good, why is that? And he says, well, maybe we should consider that creation as it is the best possible creation, and it had to contain even small traces of evil to be the best possible creation. I think if you substitute the word chaos instead of evil, it works out a little bit better. We need change agents. We need things that don't follow according to their kind to move us forward sometimes. It takes the out-of-the-box thinkers who aren't like, oh no, this is the way the world is. I can't think outside this little box. We need those crazy people who go, let's think about it from a whole new perspective. Let's think about it in a different way. Wow, look what happened. Change, growth, movement forward. I think we need it. Human beings are not created to serve and work for the gods. We're not even created to serve and work for God, Elohim, Yahweh. He didn't make us to be slaves. He didn't make us to be servants to him. Human beings are the pinnacle of creation. We are especially blessed. God blessed us. That's the first thing he does. He blesses them. And he provided for them. He says, I'm giving you everything you need, right? You're going to rule over all of the cosmos. And here's the birds, and here's the livestock, and here's the fruits, and here's the veggies, and here's the seeds, and here's all the grains. This is all for you. I'm providing for you. I'm giving it all to you. It's all yours. I want you to enjoy it. This is your place in the cosmos, to enjoy God, to be blessed by him, to enjoy all that he has provided for us. That's our place in the cosmos. Please don't tell evangelical churches that, or they wouldn't have any volunteer workers. The nursery would be empty. Nobody would be there to serve. Oh, anyway. Do you get it? So I'm gonna say something horrible to you. The story of the 7 days of creation, not scientific or historically truth. They're not scientific or historical truth. They're not. Sorry. Did it literally happen? No. It's a myth that was put together and designed to communicate to us truths about God. And these truths are wonderful and beautiful. We have a magnificent, sovereign, singular God who merely speaks and it happens. He is the creative, giving life force of all things. And he created us as the pinnacle of the creation. And he put us in a place of honor. And he blessed us. And he gave us all we needed. Wow. Okay, I just got a shiver down my spine. That was kind of nice. Right? Wow. And we need to learn to walk in that truth. And we need to teach it that way within our churches. We need to teach it that way within our churches. So that when that little kid that I taught in Sunday school begins to grow and we can impart deeper truths to him, and he becomes an adult, he's not going to find out at the age of 45 or 50 that this is just a myth and then walk away from the church because the church lied to him. He's going to go, I understand that. I understand that these beautifully inspired writers spoke in a language and communicated in a way that the people would understood, using symbols and language that they already knew, using stories they already knew to impart new truths to them. I'm looking for theological truth. I know this is not scientific truth. And by the way, our early church fathers, the vast majority of them did not believe in a literal 6 days of creation. Many of our early church fathers believed that the world was simply created instantaneously, not over 6 days. But most of our church fathers all agree on one thing. And you know what they all agree on? Our early church fathers, if you read through all their writings, they'll all agree on the same thing. We don't know the mechanism of how it was created, but that's not the point. The point is that our God is a creative, life-giving God. That's the point. With that, let me close in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you are the beginning of all things, that you are the creative, life-giving force throughout all the cosmos. Lord Jesus, we acknowledge you as our creator, as the one who brings life to all things. And we ask that we can imitate you in that way, that as we go out into the world, we can creatively bring life to others, to bring them the light of the world. We just pray this in your name. Amen. Everybody okay? Yeah, all right. Nobody's head exploded? You okay, Julie? We're all okay. All right. Ooh, okay. So once again, if you found today's content helpful, be sure to subscribe to our channel, like it, give it a little thumbs up, share this video, send it out, put it on YouTube, on Facebook and Twitter and all those kind of things. Leave us a comment. It helps our community as well as our YouTube channel. We thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. I'd be happy to answer the questions that you have about it, so put your questions down below, and I'll try to get to all of them. Oh. Again, I'm not trying to say the Bible isn't inspired. I believe it's an inspired work. I'm not trying to say the Bible's not true. I believe the Bible communicates truth, just not scientific truth. I don't think it communicates historical truth. I think it communicates theological truth to us. It's a book of wisdom to lead us to an understanding of who God is and how we relate to him. All right, so let me give you this little benediction here. As you leave this place, know that God alone is sovereign and has given humankind special honor in creation through his devotion and love. Know that all of creation, including yourself, is good. So God bless all of you. Go in peace. Thank you.
We are one in Christ, we are one in God, we are one in unity. We are one in truth, we are one in